I started reading articles like you couldn't believe. I read like insatiably anyway, but at this time period, I'm reading everything in the media that I can get my hands on. There's a couple of writers that make more sense than others that begin to start making a lot more sense of this as time's going on. And I was able to finally go, okay, look, some of these people are putting up whistleblowers from different parts of the industry that I know are telling different parts of a complete story, and I can't get the complete story. So as a producer and an investigative journalist, I want to go find out what the hell it is. So I did, and we figured it out, and one thing led to another, and my partner discovered the story of Addie, and that's where this picks up again. So as he was doing the investigation, and we were calling people to get on camera, because to do a television program, of course, and you've seen this all the time on Netflix and Showtime and so forth, you have what's known as reenactments. And you want to recreate cinematically the situation. And we reached out to the sheriff that arrived to foreclose on Addie's home at the very beginning, and he didn't want to be on camera. According to him, he had already told the story. He didn't want to go there again. He was retired. He was over it. And because I have a very tenacious associate producer, we knocked on this guy's door until he finally answered, and we talked him into going on camera. Well, as a result of him agreeing to go on camera, and just all we needed him for was to say, I arrived at X time, this is what she did, this is what I heard, just to get the facts, right? And we were going to build the recreates around that. Well, as we finished the interview, the guy's taken off his, I'll never forget this as long as I live. It's like a straight out of I don't know if you've ever seen Motherless Brooklyn or any of those kind of great noir type of, detective films. I mean, I love those. And it was a moment like that for me. This guy, Don Fothery, who was a sheriff, he pulls off his microphone and he looks at me and he says, there's some people I want you to talk to. And as it turns out, he puts me in contact with another sheriff who's in charge of Summit County, Ohio, which is Akron, Northeast Ohio, near Cleveland, Ohio, where LeBron James is from, actually.
Right.
And as it turns out, LeBron James grew up like 300 feet from where all of this stuff took place.
Really?
Yeah, pretty amazing. And he doesn't know about this. Hopefully one day we can turn him on to it, because I think he'd be pretty shocked. But so as this door opens from this tragedy from Addie Polk, it leads us smack dab to this Summit County task force. And the Summit County task force had put together an investigation to where they were able to deconstruct, as you do as investigators, what was going on in the area. And as a result, they were able to find the head of a smaller version of what was happening nationally. And they were able to put together a case that they did under RICO statutes. Now, the reason that's crazy is because my colleague, Eric Vaughn, who's the director of our program, he always said to me, Patrick, why didn't the feds prosecute under RICO statutes? That was a question that we had for 3 years prior to finding Addie Polk. And we're like, what the hell? So here we are, we backdoored into this revelation that, yes, indeed, you were supposed to prosecute this. You could have prosecuted this a number of ways, but one of which was RICO. They put the bad guy in jail. And the question then comes, well, why didn't that happen at the higher levels of Wall Street? And if the AG and this task force in Ohio can put the exact same ingredients together, why didn't that happen, for the CEO of Chase, the CEO of Goldman, the CEO of, because they were all in on this, right? So that led to further investigations. And then ultimately we realized this was the only RICO conviction in the United States. And so from what I understand, or at least from what I understand, that it's the only RICO conviction in the United States. So through this incredible tragedy of an elderly African-American woman, she literally personifies the whole fucking story in a microcosm that led to the revelation of what should have taken place. And so you've heard many people over and over, and you know this probably better than everybody. Everybody in this country knows the system is rigged. Everybody knows it's corrupt, but nobody knows who did what, when, and how, and what they got away with, and who covered it up, right? So think about this like this. There's a difference between common knowledge, like I just said, and specific knowledge. So let's say you've got a hunch that your wife is cheating. The way you handle it is going to be much different if you have evidence of that.
Right.
Than if you're just going on your gut, right?
Right.
Well, that's the whole reason we have crime in law and order, is because you investigate these things. You get the facts, and then you prosecute. So let's put this in perspective. You've got regulatory agencies around the country, like the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, is supposed to regulate the banks, especially the federal banks. You've got, I'll save you all the details in terms of what the alphabet soup of the acronyms of these agencies are, but their job is to prevent what took place, right? Then you've got the FBI. You've also got the Securities and Exchange Commission. The Securities and Exchange Commission was born out of the Great Depression. The Great Depression created what was known as the Pecora hearing by FDR, who put a crack Italian immigrant who was a prosecutor in Manhattan who didn't know finance, but he understood the mob. And so FDR puts this guy in Congress to find out what Wall Street did to create the Great Depression. And as a result of that, everybody was, I mean, we got footage, and you'll see this in later episodes, but America literally descended on Congress. And we're like, with the pitchforks, like, you fucking do this right or you're dead. And that was what was going on then. And think about World War II. What happened outside of the United States? Well, a lot of countries went to communism. A lot of countries went to fascism. We went to law and order. That's how we got the American dream. And we got the greatest resurgence of a middle class in the history of the world, right? Because that's the nature of what happens when you have the law and integrity of law and honesty that runs business. In the vacuum of that, you have absolute disorder, chaos, and criminality. So you can probably see where I'm going. But ultimately, what we reveal on this crazy journey is that you don't live in the country that you thought you lived in.
Wow. Yeah, to me, it seems like it was a situation that we hadn't really seen before as a country. Real, right? I mean, typically we're used to dealing with people with, as far as criminals are concerned, you know, we had the war on drugs. We're dealing with drug dealers, people with guns who are killing people, but not these people wearing suits,
right,
running these banks on Wall Street.
Although, let me give you an example though of how crazy this is too, right? So, like I just gave you that historical setting about the Pecora hearing, and
right,
Ferdinand Pecora got us, 5 decades of relative stability in finance. But in the 80s, we started having a lot of problems, and one of which was called the savings and loan crisis. And as it turns out, the 2008 great financial crisis was literally the third act of the S&L crisis. So we went from S&L crisis to the Enron era frauds. You ever hear Enron?
Yes.
Okay. So Enron was another variation of this. And then there was a lot of stuff in between. We had the dot-com bubble. So basically since going back to the 80s, quite frankly, we had, did you ever hear of Michael Milken? Do you ever hear of, okay. So have you ever heard of junk bonds?
Yes, I have heard of junk bonds.
So Michael Milken was known as the junk bond king, and he actually got prosecuted under RICO statutes back in the day because he was doing a similar situation of what I just laid out for you. And we haven't gone into details, but Milken was this top guy in finance. Everybody was like kissing the ring because this guy figured out all these mammoth ways to make gazillions of dollars in ways that nobody could put their fingers on, but he was giving incredible returns for investors. And it was the 80s, the go-go 80s. And so there was a lot of Wall Street people making a lot of money. As it turns out, it's based on a lot of deception and a lot of Ponzi scheming. Okay. And so Milken, and it all works until it doesn't, because it's always a bubble. Basically, the facade is it works, but it's all fiction. Okay. So just like if you and I go and we're going to go sell, I don't know, we'll say we're going to go sell dope. But we're not selling the real thing, right? And we're selling securities on it, and we can't keep up with it. That's by the way what happened in the Great Depression with all sorts of securities from around the world. But the long and the short of it is that finance, if it doesn't have rules and regulations, if it doesn't have people that are policing, and you're dealing with big time money and very, very smart people, they will unleash catastrophe. They do it all the time.
Right.
And if you don't have the law bringing them in, then, or accountability, you just wind up with corruption.
Right.
And so that's all this stuff is absolute corruption.
Well, does it make it harder to deal with the fact that these people do have so much money and power and they are so much smarter, that the people dealing with this stuff maybe aren't as competent or don't have the resources?
I think it's just courage. It's certainly not the other, because I can tell you. So I'm not a rocket scientist. If I could figure this out, anybody could figure this out. I just happen to have a lot of tenacity, and so I always believe in the world that makes sense, right? You got to have an understanding of how things work. If I want to understand my car, I understand the engine. I read the frickin' owner's manual. If I want to fly in an airplane, I understand, all the forces of what it takes to enable flight. Now, this is all surface level understanding. I'm not
Right.
going to, know how the bits and pieces come together in the electronic engineering and the rest of it, but I'll know the basics, right? And so if it doesn't add up, especially, let me give you a metaphor. Let's say I'm on a plane crash, right? And it goes down and I somehow survive it. I might want to know what caused that plane crash,
Right.
right? We've known this forever. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what we found were there were heroes at every step of the way. So not only did we find all the people that came on camera with us that are similar to the guy that you've had on that told you how the whole system worked from his trade, right? We did that with the lenders, with the appraisers, with the upstream people, that with the credit rating agencies and so forth. We deconstruct this whole thing and make it such that you can follow this, because it's a true crime. One
Right.
thing that American audiences love are crime stories. That's all this is. It's a street crime, but it's a ginormous street crime with millions of actors involved. And it literally is. And this is not hyperbole. It is the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in the history of the world.